Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, from aircraft to coffee and smoked beef, China has slapped retaliatory tariffs of $60 billion worth on American products in yet another escalation of the trade war. Last night, President Trump announced that he was imposing duties on Chinese imports for $200 billion and just threatened to target even more. Let's go live now to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie, over to you.
Matt, this is quite the escalation. 10% on $250 billion worth of Chinese imports into the US, with President Trump warning there will be more if China chooses to retaliate. That 10% will turn into 25%. If they retaliate again, then 25% on the remaining $256 billion worth of imports from China into the US. So effectively encompassing all trade with China. But this is the Donald Trump playbook. He uses tariffs, he uses sanctions as a foreign policy tool. He wants to reset the relationship with China, and this is the route that he's chosen to take. And to do that, he does it, he says, in the name of protecting American farmers, American ranchers, American workers. Nothing is sacred in this trade war, made necessary, the president says, by China sipping too long at the trough of American ingenuity and effort. Among the tariffs Beijing announced in retaliation today are extra duties on imports of American meat, wheat and textiles. In all, China plans to impose new levies of up to 10% on $60 billion worth of US goods. It was a deliberately targeted but comparatively measured response to the bombshell dropped by the president late yesterday.
And it will be a lot of money coming into the coffers of the United States.
That's one way to sell it, but what's really going on here? They're the world's two largest economies, but while the US has been enjoying a period of growth, in China there's a slowdown. That's what emboldened President Trump to slap tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese products earlier this year. Now he's taxing another $200 billion worth, which means tariffs on nearly half of all Chinese imports into the US by next year.
We can't have a healthy global economy if one of the biggest economies is basically a predator. And good for President Trump.
In Beijing, Chinese state television criticized US unilateralism and trade protectionism. But from China to the US, it's citizens who will likely feel the pain of this trade war first. So how do their views compare on President Trump's latest tactic?
I feel this is an unfriendly thing to do. I can't really comment on the specifics, but I feel what he's doing is not fair and not right.
I think it'll be a lose-lose situation, but because China has become so advanced in terms of how they are manufacturing, I don't think that they'll be hurt as much as we will.
My personal feeling is that Chinese products are cheaper and our products are better quality. So if there are increased tariffs, it would cause their spending power to decrease. So I think for their country, it's kind of a loss.
We already know that in the Midwest that they've been hurt by his tariffs already with the soybeans. So yes, we are going to be hurt over and over and over again. He is doing nothing but hurting the US right now.
In the US, the dispute will raise prices on everyday products, including electronics, food, tools and homewares. Some products will be spared, like smartwatches and Bluetooth gadgets, bicycle helmets and high chairs.
You've done the math so that you know what an average family in America will pay once these tariffs go into effect?
Because it's spread over thousands and thousands of products, nobody's going to actually notice it at the end of the day.
So that's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross with some powerful economic doublespeak, arguing if you apply a 10% tax on one product, you notice it, but a 10% tax on loads of products is barely discernible. And that's a tough sell to a lower-income American who's only buying one fridge this year. But President Trump is looking to the big picture.
Last year we lost over $500 billion to China. We can't do that. I don't want to do that. And that's been going on for many years. Other presidents should have taken care of the situation, and they didn't, but I'm going to. Yes.
His message, the buck stops with him. stopping the trade war he's started potentially not so simple.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Erica York from the Tax Foundation think tank, and from New York City, the Republican strategic advisor, John Burnett. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, John Burnett. The world economy was just beginning to recover ever so nicely since the Great Recession. Do we really need a trade war?
Well, the thing is that we don't need a trade war or trade fight or trade battle. What we need is free and fair trade. But we haven't seen that from China. You know, when we look at our intellectual property rights, when we look at the tariffs and the high barriers to entry with respect to American business in China, the barrier is extremely high. So they not only do they impose tariffs, but they also impose non-trade tariff barriers. And what President Trump wants to do is make sure there's free and fair trade. Now, annually, we've seen huge trade deficit that favors China. What President Trump wants to do is create some type of balance.
But isn't this, you know, it's unfair on the rest of the world, frankly, isn't it? It's probably going to be unfair for the very kind of American workers that Donald Trump says he's trying to protect.
Look, my father always said, if you don't do the right thing, either you pay me now or you pay later. And when you wait later on, it's far worse. What we've seen is that our national trade deficit has increased exponentially, in part due to these one-sided trade deals, specifically using China as an example. Right. So when we're running an annual trade deficit, we have to plug that gap with debt. That's even more troublesome in an inflationary market. You know, as the Fed increases interest rates, that's going to adversely impact us. So it's better if we actually pay a little now to make sure that we can actually right this wrong.
Okay, let's turn to Erica York. I mean, you talk to any Western businessman trying to do deals in China, and they will tell you the same story, which is that it is not a level playing field. You know, that they are at a disadvantage there. So Donald Trump has a point there, doesn't he?
There certainly are things that we need to address in our trading relationships with other countries. If countries have policies that are unfair to American businesses, that's something that needs to be addressed. However, going about that by applying broad tariffs, which is really just another word for a tax increase on Americans, isn't a proven strategy to address those shortcomings in trade deals. Tariffs increase the price that U.S. businesses have to pay and increase the price that U.S. consumers have to pay. So in the end, this is really harmful to those businesses that we say we want to help. We've actually estimated that just the tariffs imposed so far will shrink the U.S. economy by $30 billion and will result in 90,000 fewer full-time jobs in our economy. So that's walking back reforms that we've made on taxes, on regulation, and pursuing tariffs isn't going to help Americans.
But isn't it possible that this is yet another example of Trump tactics? In other words, you know, he raises the roof, you know, he hollers all he can, everyone is terribly shocked, and then actually at the end of the day, you get some results.
We don't know what the end game is. The end game isn't in sight. What we've seen happen so far is phase 1 of tariffs on China, phase 2 of tariffs on China, which is these recently announced 10% tariffs. We've said those are going to increase to 25% beginning in 2019. And then there's an additional round of tariffs after that that we've threatened. And there's also retaliatory tariffs in the picture. We haven't seen tariffs come down. We haven't seen barriers be lowered. We've only seen them increase, which falls on Americans.
John Burnett, just on that particular point, I mean, we haven't seen any results yet that Donald Trump can point to. And at the same time, we know that there's a political reason for doing this. It's called the midterm elections. Is it actually possible that Donald Trump is risking global prosperity just because he wants the Republicans to prevail in these upcoming elections?
You know, China's trade tactics arguably can be viewed as the modern-day neo-colonialism with respect to cheap goods, manipulating their currency, stealing property rights, intellectual property rights, and so on. I can go down the list. But it's important to know and understand how we got here. And we did not get here overnight. And the remedy to these trade deficits and this unfair trade battle typically will not actually be overcome quickly. And what President Trump has tried to do is negotiate. But the key is we tried to negotiate behind closed doors. China refuses to do it, so we had no other alternative but to go down this route. Now, whether it's midterm elections or not, Donald Trump doesn't play politics. What he plays is the market, and what he's trying to do is get a fair deal for America. Because you know what? The thing is that debt is robbing our freedom, robbing our health care, robbing our entitlement programs.
We're running out of
to
time.
pay interest and to pay debt.
Okay, I'm going to give one last chance to Erica York. As you heard John Burnett there say, they've tried everything else, it didn't work. What are the other alternatives for getting China to play fair and square? Briefly.
I think working with our trade partners, maybe bringing this to the WTO, those are valid alternatives. But raising taxes on Americans is not a proven strategy to help Americans. It's our consumers, our businesses, our manufacturers who are put at a disadvantage when they now have to pay 10%, 25% tariffs on the things that they need to live their lives or to run their businesses.
All right, you both had your chance. We've run out of time. Erica York, John Burnett, sorry, got to leave it there. Got to leave it there. Thank you very much.
The trade conflict between the United States and China is intensifying after the US announced the biggest round of tariffs so far against some Chinese goods. Beijing has hit back by imposing new trade tariffs on a range of American goods. President Trump has insisted the tariffs are necessary to cut the trade deficit between the two countries, currently over $375 billion. In a moment, we'll hear from our China correspondent, John Sudworth, but we'll start with our North America editor, John Sopel.
It's a good time to be in the container business in the US as more and more goods pour in from abroad. But it's not good for the deficit, and Donald Trump, from well before he became president, has railed at the unfairness of trade between the US and China.
We are the piggy bank to the world. We've been ripped off by China. We've been ripped off by the European Union. We've been ripped off by everybody.
In 2017, US imports from China amounted to $506 billion. Tariffs have so far been applied to $53 billion worth of Chinese exports. The tariffs announced today will now affect $200 billion worth of goods from China. And there's a warning that might rise by an additional $267 billion if China attempts further retaliation. Because Chinese action is already taking its toll on exporters. Farmers on land and farmers of the sea are feeling the effects. Lobster fishermen in Maine are finding a big drop in demand for their luxury produce, which is exported live to China. It's becoming too expensive for consumers there. And across America, this is starting to hurt all sorts of businesses. This is a trade dispute that Donald Trump started, and Donald Trump believes that he can win. The US calculation is this: because the deficit is so huge, China will soon run out of products on which it can impose tariffs. Or as Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross put it, they'll run out of bullets.
At this trade fair today, China was showing off its latest gadgets. It's all part of a plan to create a world-beating high-tech economy, a plan it believes the US tariffs are designed to stop. For policymakers here in China, every line in this latest and extremely long list of US tariffs will read as proof of a real threat to the very economic model on which this country's success has been built: exports and state backing for industry. The response has been swift.
China has no choice but to retaliate in order to firmly defend our legitimate interests and the global free trade order.
In 2017, China imported $130 billion worth of US goods. The first round of tariffs this year hit $50 billion of that trade. And today, almost all remaining imports, $60 billion worth, were targeted. But while China may have few options left, many US businesses don't think the Trump tariffs are working.
We had a survey recently, only 6% currently were reconsidering moving back to the US. So the US is hoping for job creation. We don't really see that happening.
It's the grim prospect of economic pain with no political gain. John Sudworth, BBC News, Beijing.